This work is Thomas Gainsborough's conversation piece, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, completed between 1747 and 1748. The couple, William and Frances, sit on a bench in their Ballington estate and look out over the viewer. The purpose behind this work was more than just a reminder of the couple's marriage. It was the display of the joining together of two figures from wealthy families. Frances came from a wealthy French family who had made their money in the textiles industry. However, the couple are not newlywed. By this time, Frances was in her 40s and William in his 50s. The picture is not about youth and new love. It is a symbol of the economic success of a long-standing marriage, a reminder of what has been rather than a display of what is to come. It is also possible that it was made in anticipation of William's death in December 1748, an early memento mori that could be displayed and allow him to look over his family. Gainsborough came from the same village as the Carters, though much younger. However, it is likely that the artist was familiar with the couple, hence why he was chosen despite not yet being a recognised artist. One of the most striking elements of this work is the difference in size between Mr. and Mrs. Carter, though the most likely explanation is that this was an early work in Gainsborough's career, and therefore he had not yet refined his portrait skills, especially since his love was for landscape. It is also possible that Gainsborough finished this work in his London studio and used mannequins as a reference for the bodies.
The pair wear contemporary clothing that is typical of the higher social classes. A notable costume choice is Frances's decision to wear only one of her two gloves, with the other glove laying limp in her lap. The glove may serve as an indicator of how she feels at home on the estate, as the gloves were usually worn outside and taken off when indoors or at home. The fact that Frances only wears one in an outdoor environment may be in reference to her being comfortable on her own land. Again, this pushes the idea that comfort and homeliness can be directly linked to the estate, again highlighting the contentment she feels in her social and economic position.
The bench on which William and Frances sit is an intricately carved style popular during the 18th century. It is similar to that in Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, another of Gainsborough's work, but it differs slightly, suggesting that it may have been a fictitious addition that Gainsborough added, along with the statue that sits behind the oak tree. The style of the foliage that surrounds the couple is also recognisable as Gainsborough's due to the similarities of his other works, such as Wooded Landscape with a Peasant Resting that was also completed in 1747. This is Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, also by Gainsborough, now housed in the National Gallery. The figures are Frances, the Carter's daughter, and Robert, their son-in-law. As we can see, there is a strong emphasis on the landscape behind them. The figures are off-centre, and the focus is not solely on them, but the fields that surround them. The focus on the land is not only because of Gainsborough's love of landscape painting. The land tells a story. The land had been split by the previous owner and bequeathed to Mr. Carter and Mr. Andrews Sr., Robert's father. When Mr. Carter bequeathed his half to Robert, on marrying his daughter, it was assumed that the young couple would own the whole plot. However, Mr. Andrews Sr. left his half to his wife, whom, after his death, used it to pay off a debt. This meant that Mr. Andrews, rather than inheriting the whole plot, had to buy back the half previously left to his father. The painting is believed to have been a celebration of the unification of the land. But more than just a display of wealth, it was a display of their heritage and the two families being unified through marriage. Unlike Mr. and Mrs. Carter, the landscape of Mr. and Mrs. Andrews shows the estate in all its glory. The land features so much in this work that it has prompted some critics to refer to the work as a triple portrait of the husband, wife, and their land. The land behind the couple is fertile, suggesting a future long and happy marriage, especially since the land is believed to have been part of Frances's dowry. The fertile land also alludes to the young woman's role as a childbearer. Gainsborough uses the visual links of the similar style dresses and benches to tie the two paintings together. We can also see a river that splits the two halves of the land running through the backdrop of both paintings. When viewed together, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews reads as a continuation of Mr. and Mrs. Carter, the next chapter in the family story. Unlike Mr. and Mrs. Carter, the painting of Mr. and Mrs. Andrews was completed early in the couple's marriage. However, it again does not show an intimacy between the two. Rather, the couple also sit separately, which suggests this is a continued display of the family's wealth rather than their love. There is very little to distinguish the backdrop on which they sit. However, the river that runs through the back of it allows us to tie the work to Mr. and Mrs. Andrews and tell a story that unites the two.
Unlike the Carters, in Mr. and Mrs. William Hallett, also known as the Morning Walk, the pair appear to have a relationship which extends beyond the mutual benefit of an economically driven union. The couple walk arm in arm and seem to be looking in the same direction as they walk with their Pomeranian, a popular breed of dog at the time which was much larger then than it is now. The difference in the presentation of both couples shows a contrast in the relationships and motives for the commissioning of both portraits. The Halletts seem to have wanted to express the love shared between them, whereas the Carters aimed to express power. In conclusion to the points explored earlier, it's safe to assume that the motive behind Gainsborough's Mr. and Mrs. Carter was to demonstrate the economic value of the Carters and to communicate how this value can be passed down through generations, creating a strong, powerful family legacy.